Our first reading this morning is a poem from Lee Young Lee. The birds don't alter space, they reveal it. The sky never fills with any leftover flying. They leave nothing to trace. It is our own astonishment collecting in chill air. Be glad. They equal their due moment, never begging, and enter ours without parting day. See how 3 birds on a winter tree make the tree barer. 2 fly away and new rooms open up in December. Give up what you guessed about a whirring heart with little beaks and claws, their constant hunger. We're the nervous ones. If even one of our violent number could be gentle long enough that one of them found it safe inside our finally untroubled and untroubling gaze, who wouldn't hear what singing completes us? The second reading will be done by Dr. Zuniga.
Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become wholly ourselves. Let us be aware of the source of being, common to us all and to all living things, evoking the presence of the great compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other, with humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us. Let us practice the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. From Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. And I'll say everybody still hear me? Okay. Thank you, everyone. So I had the presence of sitting with your ministerial team on Tuesday morning, and I was invited to speak, and I'm honored to be here. And one of the things we talked about, kind of just what's going on a micro level for a lot of us individually, including myself, and on a macro level in our society, is maybe we're feeling overwhelmed by the world. Maybe we're feeling kind of burnt out. And so that's originally what I was going to speak about. And then as I thought to myself, I kind of thought, oh my goodness, probably like all of you, seeing the news, reading news articles, seeing the things that are unfolding in the world, especially in the Middle East and amidst our own government, things that are going on, it can feel really overwhelming. And as I was reflecting on what I was going to say today, one of the things I did want to at least give mention to is what's happening in the Middle East. It seems so deeply cyclical, and it seems so hard to even talk about. And so I found 2 things that were helpful in my own formation, and I'm just going to read these briefly. One of which is from a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, and the poem is Recommendation. Even as they strike you down with a mountain of hatred and violence, even as they step on you and crush you like a worm, even as they dismember and disembowel you, remember, my friends, remember, humanity is not the enemy. And speaking to what's happening in the Middle East, so probably everybody's heard of Thich Nhat Hanh. He founded a Zen community, an international Zen community really, named Plum Village. And the Plum Village International Monastic Community just put out a statement on what's happening in the Middle East, which I won't read in its entire. I'll just read 2 brief excerpts, but it's worth Googling. And again, it's from the Plum Village International Monastic Community, and they're talking about the most recent, just in the last couple of weeks, what's unfolded in the Middle East, and hopefully bringing out an eventual cessation of what is the hostilities that are happening. The war's cessation now depends on our capacity as human beings to listen deeply, resist polarization and discrimination, and take concrete steps towards lasting reconciliation with love in our hearts. Love, compassion, and courage need to have a place in politics. So let us create islands of nonviolence and peace in our hearts, in our homes and beyond, via email, phone, and video. Let us live every moment seeing those we think of as the enemy as not separate from ourselves, as our own blood, skin, and bones. And let us not allow hatred to take over. Let us come back and take care of our feelings with calm and clarity, holding our sadness, fear, anger, and despair, and resist the temptation to blame, punish, and have to choose a side. Signed, with all beings suffering in the hell of war, the Plum Village International Monastic Community. So, thank you for letting me share that. So originally, when I was thinking what I would call my sermon, Dharma talk, I thought I'd call it Returning to a Skillful Path, which is a very Zen-y thing to say. Yeah, and I like that, but returning to a skillful path, and then this passage from the Plum Village International Monastic Community, I have to tell you, my friends, it really touched my heart. And I love the phrase, creating islands of nonviolence and peace in our own hearts. That really resonated with me. There's a classic, there's kind of a classic old Zen story of there's a Zen master and a social justice advocate talking together, and they're kind of talking about their paths and kind of how they're similar and different. And the social justice advocate says to the Zen master, she says, oh, well, you know, I really love Zen because in Zen, ultimately, you're creating a path that's inward, where you have a path of calmness amidst the craziness of our world. You know, and as a Zen monk, I like that. But I have to tell you, so I also happen to be a psychologist. As a psychologist, I can say one of the best ways to change our emotions, our unhelpful thoughts, our unhelpful behaviors or relationship patterns, one of the best ways to change is to actually change our environment, to change our society. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. But one of the things I wanted to focus on today was, as they talk about with the Plum Village Monastic Community, creating islands of nonviolence and peace in our hearts. And I think when we talk about that, some of the ideas that are helpful for me, some kind of classic bedrock principles in Buddhism that are helpful for me when we talk about creating inward spaces of nonviolence. The first of these things, and when we think about the immensity of what's happening in our world, in our society, or maybe just our own personal lives, the first thing I always like to talk about, so there's a couple key ideas, and I think they're all interrelated. The first is the difference between pain and suffering. Pain and suffering. We use those as kind of analogies or similes, and we think of them as being similar, and they are, but they're subtly and significantly different. Pain is inevitable. Pain will occur. As we say in Buddhism, we all get older, we all get sick, everything is impermanent, everything changes. Life involves pain. There is difficulty. Sometimes, the more valuable something is, the more difficulty and pain it might involve. Sometimes, not that we want to punish ourselves, but sometimes the more you're in the world, the more pain you will feel. If you read biographies or autobiographies of any great person, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Mother Teresa, Desmond Tutu, Maya Angelou, whoever it is, sometimes the people who do the most in the world, the most enlightened people among us have the most profound, deep pain. Sometimes this is true, but pain is not suffering, at least from the Buddhist perspective. Suffering is a little different. Suffering is when we cling to things that cause our pain to become even worse. Significantly, suffering from a Buddhist context is often when we move away from our values, from our purposeful path. Maybe you have great difficulty in your life. Maybe you take one step forward and, oh my goodness, you take 4 or 5 steps back. So hard, so difficult. But that is not necessarily suffering, because you're engaging in your purpose. You're engaging in your values. You're engaging in what matters most. We'll come back to that idea of values in just a second. But we want to understand, at least from the Buddhist context, that if you are in the world, if you're doing the work that matters, if you're doing your very best, even when you make mistakes, again and again and again, the intention matters. Your values matter. And in a very similar way, a kind of facet of the same diamond is the notion of the word. We have 2 main concepts for suffering in Buddhism. And one of those concepts is the term that we use. It's called samsara. Samsara is a Sanskrit word, and it's also fun to say, samsara. It's kind of just a cool word, isn't it? Sanskrit's fun. But samsara. And samsara translated to English literally means to journey. So if we were to say, you have samsara, in a way, we're not even saying you're suffering. What we're saying is, you are on a journey. And one of the reasons I like that personally, my friends, is because we tend to think of suffering as a monolithic entity. Suffering, it will never change. No, no, no. In Buddhism, we say everything changes. Everything changes. So the reason we call suffering samsara in Buddhism is because suffering is a journey. Now, suffering is when we cling to things that cause us to suffer more. It's kind of like a descending vortex. But suffering is a journey. Suffering can be reversed. Suffering can then start to move in an upward direction. And often, I do believe this in my heart, the things that cause us the greatest difficulty, the greatest mistakes we sometimes might make in our life, are also the very thing that might help liberate us and reverse us out of that difficulty. So we want to think about the difference between pain and suffering. You might be having great difficulty in your life, but from the Buddhist perspective, if you're adhering to your values, if you have good intentionality, if you are working hard, if you're adhering to your path, as painful as you might be, and I hope you're not in pain, but you will be in pain sometimes. It is inevitable. If are on our value-based path, you're not suffering, and you may be changing the world. You may be reversing these cycles of samsara. And this brings us to another thing, the idea of acceptance. People sometimes say to me, Dave, I need to accept this more. I need to accept this. I need to be a good Buddhist, or be a good Christian and accept this. Acceptance. We throw the word acceptance around, I think a little bit like a hammer or a cudgel. We kind of beat up on ourselves, like, why don't you accept this more? You should accept this. I don't think that's the way acceptance works. Acceptance doesn't mean that everything's hunky-dory, that everything's okay, that we don't feel pain. Again, we will feel pain. What acceptance is we bring ourselves back to our path again and again and again. Sometimes you will make mistakes. I make a ton of them every day. Acceptance means we make a path individually and as a community to bring ourselves back. That's the spiritual path. And so the last thing I want to say too, and I think this really relates to the idea of peacemaking in the world, we distinguish between goals and values. And I think we get those confused a little bit. Goals are very good. We might have all kinds of goals, I was sharing this with maybe Donna, I don't know, somebody earlier today. I like to eat healthy. That's one of my goals, right? Sometimes I feel sad, this is true, and I'll have a little bit of comfort eating, So I might have the value of healthy eating, right? I have the goal of eating healthy day to day. Do I always eat healthy day to day? No, I do not. But I have the wider value-based path of taking care of my health. Goals are very, very good. Goals are short. They're, psychologists love goals because we can measure goals. We can, are you meeting your goals? Are you not meeting your goals? You can, track it, measure it, all this kind of good stuff. It's good. But if we only think about goals, I will accomplish this social justice goal or that social justice goal. That's good stuff. But if we get caught in the short term, it's kind of like we say in Buddhism, it's like monkey mind. We're leaping from tree to tree to tree, looking for things to bring us nirvana. Nirvana isn't goals, goals, goals. It's your way of being in the world, your values, your purpose. So when we think about our values are why we're here. They're verbs, they're adverbs, they're how we live our life. Sometimes I do this with my clients. I call it the death test. When you're staring back at the end of your life, when you're thinking about what's most important, what really matters to you? What do you want the story of your life to look like? As both Nietzsche and the pop star Kelly Clarkson said, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. What is it that's really important to you? What really matters? Ground yourself in your values amidst these difficult times. Ground yourself in what matters most to you. Thank you, my friends.
Our tradition to spend a minute pondering what we've heard.